And it slides down.
So we'll go ahead and get started. And so next we have Mr. Matt Williams, another Mr. representative here. And so Matt is going to be talking to us about building footprints.
Right.
I've generated a lot of hubbub.
All right, that's good, I guess. I hope that's a good sign. Okay, so I'm Matt Williams. I'm Fort Dagami, as Teresa said, and I'm a geohazards analyst. First of all, I want to thank OJIC for having us here, giving us this opportunity. So yeah, I'm going to talk about building footprints today. So before we get going, this is what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about just some broad level stuff with what the main goal of this proposal is, the potential users of this data set, how the building footprints are going to be integrated with other data sets, or how they work with other data sets. What is the current state of the building data sets that are out there in Oregon? And how they work with the framework data. Then I'm going to just break down my work plan from the first step of data compilation. I'm going to go over the Microsoft Bing buildings. I'm just going to call them Microsoft buildings, but officially they're Bing buildings. I will go over that because that's a big part of what makes this whole thing possible. And then the long process of the cleanup of the data, and then just sort of that finalized portion of attribution, how the work group plays into this, and the budget deliverables. So my primary goal is the main concept that I want to convey with this is that it's a single data set for the whole state of Oregon, but mainly it's going to be it's geometry centric. There's a tremendous amount of work involved where adding a lot of extra things other than just getting the shapes themselves correct it'd just be too much work. So right now it's a phased approach. So in this first initial phase of this, we propose that we just work on getting the shapes correct and kind of just getting complete coverage for the whole state. And we want to review this data so it can be reliable, it's been vetted, and it can be used in analysis at a high resolution scale. And I guess the main one of the other concepts of this is that it would represent the best available data based on the quality of the imagery that it came from. Although it's not always imagery, sometimes I think actually Metro has some CAD-based buildings that are in there too. So as-built, I should say. So here's some of the potential users of this data. This is just something I just came up with. There's probably I'm sure there's more than this. It's not a comprehensive list, and I come from a very biased point of view come from a hazards background. So I often think about buildings in terms of natural hazards. So things like public safety, planning, emergency managers, first responders, like evacuation routes, or we do a lot of hazard analysis, so risk assessments, social vulnerability. I think there was some got presented about census data, but there's lots of demography type work you can do with building footprints. Yeah, this list goes on and on. Yeah, this is again, this is just an example of how we use building footprints in our analysis. This is a flood damage assessment and a earthquake damage assessment using building footprints. It just gives you that high resolution, detailed oriented results. That's how we make best use of it. But again, it's whatever your agency or group would make use of these buildings. That's sky's the limit. So here's what here's an example of how we've integrated building footprints with other data sets. This is an example of taking assessors data and integrating it with the building footprints, and you can see that how the assessor data is extremely complementary with building footprints, so it really lends itself to showing you some really interesting results from that pairing of data. This is the current state of buildings that I know of. I would be willing to bet there's some couple of ones floating out there that I'm not aware of, because I just recently, a couple days ago, went through just every single county GIS web page just to see what they had publicly available. I actually found Josephine County and Benton County that I added to this. This map is a little bit different than what is in my proposal, because I added those 2 extra counties. I have heard rumors that Lynn County has building footprints, although I don't know that for sure. It's true. Great. It's good to know. Good to know. And I think Crook County might have buildings. I'm not funded yet, so I can't do that work. But that would be kind of step 1 of finding what buildings are out there and then assessing their quality. So just by the numbers here, we're estimating that there's about 2.5 million buildings in the state. Dogami has 500,000. These other data sets that I've kind of tracked down, Metro being obviously the big one, that's about 1 million buildings. So that we're estimating that the Microsoft buildings are going to have to fill in the gaps for about 1 million buildings. And we estimate about 5% of those are incorrect. They need to be fixed in some way. I'm going to go over each of those types of fixes that we are proposing to do. This is how the buildings integrate with or how it plays in with the framework data sets. It integrates well with these themes on the left side. Elements within them. There's so many elements that I feel like it really works well with that I don't want to list all of them, but these are all the themes that I saw that they have elements that work well with buildings. And then also the buildings themselves there's subsets, there's elements in the framework that I would consider subsets of building footprints that I have listed over here. I don't know, lighthouses, I mean, I guess that's a building. We can talk about that. It's definitely open to discussion. So here's how I'm going to accomplish this, or how I'm proposing to accomplish this. First step is to compile the data, to basically just go out, emailing, contacting county, municipalities, finding what building footprints are out there, and then assessing them for quality. Most of them so far, I took a quick glance at Josephine and Benton counties. They look really good. They're tight. They're on it. So really good coverage. But again, that's just part of the process to make sure that again, going back to what I said before, the best available data. We want to make sure that these are of a quality where that they can be used reliably in some sort of analysis. And another part of that is, well, again, this is reiterating, I guess, is looking at the age of the imagery that the buildings were derived from and their level of quality. Then the next part is to start editing, and that's going to be mostly just editing the Microsoft buildings through deletion, correction, and even digitizing in some cases. And then the last part would be to infill in areas where we already have buildings, but they might be from an older source. For example, a lot of the coastal buildings are from 2009 LIDO. So those areas are 10 years old now. A lot of development has occurred. You can take those Microsoft buildings and fill in those gaps where there's newer buildings. And then the last part is to write a report describing my methods, my results, and some FGDC compliant metadata. I have talked about this already, so I'm going to skip this slide. But this is the data compilation part. I've already described this. So let's move on. So here's a breakdown of this is just sort of some background information on the Microsoft buildings. It was done, I think, a year and a half ago. It was it was machine learning based, which basically they created this algorithm, let the computer run, and then they had trainers that would look and see the accuracy. They would say, this is a building, you were correct this time, you weren't correct this time, or you weren't correct, and then rerun it based on that feedback from the trainers, and then keep running it until it got to a level of accuracy, which I was saying, in the report they have 93.5 as their accuracy. We ballparked it as 5%, completely independent of that estimation, so it's around that area. It's all derived from Bing imagery. Oh yeah, that's what this percentages here is. This 93.5 is what they estimated. The errors that we find they tend to be false positives, I guess, and we'll see some examples of that in just a sec. First of all, though, a big error type that we find and that needs to be corrected is you'll see that these blue outlines are what are Bing output buildings, or Microsoft output buildings. The red are what we hand digitized. These large buildings, whenever buildings are super close together, they get merged together in this algorithm. So these need to be split apart. The main reason is because it won't integrate well with things like address points or tax lot information. You can't describe what a building is if it's made of several buildings. Maybe one of them is an unreinforced masonry building, and another one is, just precast concrete, for example. So being able to split these buildings up and then provide, then you can describe them individually. And you see that mostly in downtown areas where the buildings are really tight. This is another error example that we find a lot of, is just random, whatever it was picking up in the algorithm, it was thinking these were buildings. I think there was must have been some spectral component to this, I think, because it doesn't do this everywhere. It just does it in some places, which is strange. Also in national forests, will just be these little speckly, pardon? This is Harney Basin. But you see this stuff everywhere. Like you'll see it in wheat fields, gigantic things like this. I don't know what it's picking up on. I think there's like a 90-degree component too. So it looks, and I think that's what's happening here in these cliff areas. But it doesn't do it everywhere, which is strange. So that's why I think there's a spectral component to it, but I don't.
Or they had a QC part of it. I see.
I don't know if they QC'd it. I don't know. Do you know, John, if they QC'd the? I think they just created it and spit it out. After they reached some sort of level of accuracy, they was like, okay, here we go. We're releasing it.
How recently did you download it?
It's only one data set. They don't learn it. They have no plans to update it. They just did it. It was a one and done thing. They might update it, but
So when did you download it?
I downloaded, John downloaded it actually. Earlier this year. Pardon?
I mean, I have two different versions of it. I just recently downloaded it. It has more.
It's different. Okay, I didn't know that. Do you know about that, Tanya? Yeah.
Oh, I've downloaded it a couple times, but I haven't. I mean, are you talking about geometry?
No, it appeared that they had some sort of tiling scheme. So if you look like in West Lynn, the first, last year's version had a lot of gaps that were obviously just tile based, and now those are filled in.
Yeah, they might have rerun it against new imagery, because if you get deep enough in the metadata, the imagery that generated going back to 2012, so they had newer data.
So here's another error type that we want to address, are these very large buildings. Some reason it wants to create these weird angles. You see this quite a bit. Your big box stores often happens, or just whenever there's the building slightly irregular, just not a regular rectangle. It'll do some funky stuff. So those we want to fix. Also, mist buildings. Sometimes they're obscured by a tree, or just sometimes they're just flat out mist. Sometimes the imagery I'm looking at is newer than what the Bing imagery is, and so it just misses stuff like that. Those we will want to digitize. This type of error, this is NAIP imagery. It's not the best quality. I would not be using this in my work, but it was readily available, so I just wanted to create this image real quick. But this building right here, this is from Google. This is more on par what I would be using. This is just a box. This is just a square, and it does this notching for some reason. I think it's picking up on the roof line or something. But that's something that happens so frequently, and it's so hard to find these kind of errors that it's gonna just have to be something we'll have to live with. Otherwise, it would just be, I mean, months and months and months of work, thousands of dollars to address all that. But again, this is phase one, so maybe in future phases, that's definitely open to talking about that. Here's the mist buildings. This is the infilling process. So this is where we already have existing buildings where the Microsoft buildings can fill in these gaps. So this is like a new development here, and we have buildings. These red ones are what we've digitized, and then these are newer buildings that Microsoft has. Attribution considerations, I want to keep it really simple. Again, this is a geometry-centered phase, so I don't want to get too mired into what kind of attributes we want to include, because that can definitely happen after this initial phase. But I do want to contain the derivation source, the date of that source, who created it, and the square footage. And then further attribution post-geometry phase. Work group and stewardship considerations are, we're going to coordinate with the buildings work group on how to maintain this data, what kind of GIS standard we want to have with the attributes. But I think, again, I would propose keeping it very simple. I definitely want to have we have to have a unique ID. That needs to be discussed if it's going to be a county-based unique ID or just statewide. That's something I want to talk about, but later on. But this initial phase, again, is just, there's so much work with just doing the geometry part that the other parts just have to come later. And so my budget, what I'm asking for is $91,000 of FIT funding to do this. We have a match, or an in-kind match of 24. I don't know if that's a match, but it's a Dogami contribution of 24,000. I'll be doing this work, and then for the report part and the review, we'll have our publications coordinator do that. And I estimated about almost 8 months of work to do this. My deliverables will be the statewide data, statewide building footprints, metadata, and a report documenting my methods and results. And I'll take some questions.
On that, are there any existing standards, like from the feds or other states working on that kind of thing?
I don't know. I don't know. Again, though, yeah, I mean, are you talking about as far as the attribution goes? Yeah. Again, that's something I definitely want to dialogue about, but I really want to focus on just getting the geometry correct first, because again, it's a lot of work.
Do you have a method for getting at structures that are under forest cover?
Under forest cover. So I've thought about that. I think I think probably the best way to do that would be to use try to get assessor's data somehow, tax lot information, try to find some information that might indicate that there's there's a building here. But yeah, I haven't really thought about in that deep forest cover how to get at that. But you know, the buildings, the Microsoft building does get at those quite a bit. We can use, yeah, I don't want to speculate too much on that. But.
Maybe a program to coordinate with, that maybe Emma knows more about this than I do. There is a group called Terra that's trying to get fire risk on structures. So they're going house to house.
Okay.
I don't know what that is.
Right.
That
Yeah.
might be a
You
way
know
to
about
get
that.
some of those forested structural.
I'm not sure if the licensing on that is a challenge.
We all have a shared interest, comprehensive building stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, that's why I want to get this as good as possible. But yeah, I'm definitely open to hearing ideas on how to get to those kind of problems. There's other problems too, but that's definitely one of them, for sure.
Is this gonna include floating homes and floating businesses?
Yes, it will, because that is something that the data set has in it already. We've also, in the Godami's work, we've also got those as well. So, yeah, and again, I didn't mention this, and I think in my proposal, I said that I wanted to limit it to a 400 square foot structure, but I think that's probably not a good idea. As I was doing this presentation, I was like, yeah, it's probably better just to leave whatever's there and not try to make any kind of determinations on size limitations, because that can happen later. That's an easy thing. It's like you can just select everything that's a smaller size and get rid of it. That's kind of a tangent to what you were asking, but yeah.
And would those be categorized?
No, it won't be, but again, that's something that would happen after this initial part of digitization.
You mentioned the size limitation, I haven't really looked into that, but would it pick up like larger recreation areas, would it pick up rescue buildings?
It does, yeah, it includes all that stuff, yeah, for sure. Yeah, but you know, it's like also it'll grab like outhouses or like little beehive boxes, things like that. It's like, that's not a building, but
They're easy to do.
that's true.
It's my home.
I thought Tanya had a question back there.
Oh, yeah, for the areas that we have that are coming from local governments,
That's coming from Harvard?
local governments.
Okay,
It's, from the map, maybe think that you're likely to keep the local source over some other source that you have generated.
yes,
Is that correct?
yeah, absolutely.
So if that's the case, I know you don't want to do attributes, but I wonder, do they have a key or an ID that they
Yeah.
need to preserve?
Yeah.
So that they can, because I'm sure they're using
Right.
links to a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, I guess you're right, yeah. I had to have to tie it into what is already existing.
Yes, that's a
That's true.
super minimal attribute. That at least
Yeah, just something that
about.
can, yeah. That's a really good point, yes, absolutely.
For a unique ID, I would suggest using the open location code. You can download the Python script, and it takes about a half hour, and you calculate it for the entire data set. And then it also has, in addition to being unique, 12-digit alphanumeric, then you've got, also have some true location information embedded in it.
Right,
So it would be unique, as well as then having some intelligence.
right. Oh, let's say that again.
Open location codes,
Open location, okay.
or Google calls them plus codes.
Yeah. I mean, I was also thinking, sorry, but yeah, I'll look into that, but you guys have kind of related questions. And
Yeah, because, I mean, I feel that it's the same way, not necessarily, I don't know that I care what codes to do, but
being able to link it back to what,
the super useful thing about having at least an ID is that then if, you know, you stated some of the errors that you can't correct. In the future, if someone gives you a bunch of corrections,
Yes. How is that gonna,
Yeah.
how are you gonna integrate that?
or if there's multiple iterations of corrections.
Right. I know, and I mean, the maintenance of this is, of the state set is super important. That's probably gonna be the number one thing to hammer out, is how we're gonna maintain it, because the development, it's always happening. So it's always needs to be maintained, so.
So can you talk about your investigation into the Microsoft licensing and your Google talk us a little bit about that, about not being able to share. It's
Right,
2 sentences back to back about Microsoft. and
You're right,
Google,
I did.
And so I can't tell what exactly you mean by that. And
Okay.
are you sure that that this product that you download and manipulate, is it distributable? Have you had someone from your contracts or DOJ look at this license? You restate the sentences and programs.
Yeah, that's exhibit.
Yeah, so Rachel Smith is asking about, in my proposal, I have a paragraph, one describing how Microsoft buildings are open source, and then another sentence about how we looked into other proprietary data sets to see if they were like Google Maps. They have building footprints, but those are proprietary. You have to pay for those, and we're not going to do that. So, and even if you got them, I don't think you could distribute them publicly. I don't know if I've looked into the actual licensing of the Microsoft buildings, but I just assume that since it's open source, it's actually, they intended it to be integrated into OpenStreetMaps, right? So, do you know more about it than I do?
I can speak on the licensing a little bit. It's good that you're not adding attributes, because basically the only way you can get yourself in trouble is by, if you were to attach attributes that are somehow considered private, then the license on the data set would make those attributes public. Basically, anything that is attached to the public must be public. So the way to be the most compliant with the license is to only attach other public things to the public. That's, you can use the data freely for anything. The one condition is that anything you attach to that will become public.
Right, okay,
It's a viral public license.
okay. Viral public license, okay.
Nicer way to call this.
Well, I don't think viral is a bad word, but it helps explain how the license works.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question about timing for engaging stakeholders in the work group.
Right. I think maybe having a regular, just a progress report. It's like, this is where I'm at, this is where I'm moving, and just sort of have the work group direct that. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, what's the typical, I know that LCOG, whenever they were working on the land use projects, they had sort of a biannual kind of thing, or that was.
Well, I mean, I think we need to convene the group initially and speak with them about what they would like to
Right.
have from you, because given the newness of it and the number of stakeholders that are interested in having say in the products, I think that to me suggests they need to be engaged early,
Yeah.
and at least probably for the first part of the project more frequently. And maybe once things have settled down, less frequently.
Right.
Might be an option.
Well, that's full disclosure though. I didn't realize that when we met in October, that was actually us forming a work group. I didn't realize that. And then as I was putting this presentation together, like, oh wait, that was a work group. So I was under the assumption that we hadn't even made a work group yet, but we have. And so
Nascent.
it's nascent.
Well, I think the issue is that the framework forum, though, everybody thought that this was an element that needed a work group and needed buy-in from a group of people. And so from that perspective, I think the recommendation is that group needs to be involved, just much like most of these other proposals are including a work group that is surrounded by a framework or fit interested parties that is part of the project, providing input and.
Right. Yeah.
Just want to make sure that no one on the phone has a question. About 1 minute left. I apologize. Okay, thanks so much,
Thank you.
Matt. Next, we have Fletcher O'Brien, also from Dubami. He's presenting on behalf of himself and Jonathan Allen on their proposal to put together a tsunami database compilation.
Hi, I'm Fletch from Dogami, and this proposal was an idea mainly from Jonathan Allen, who works out of our Newport office. And we got together and thought about this and thought it'd be a pretty good project. So this project is not making anything new. We're just compiling a bunch of data sets. Some are published, some are not published. And we want to get them all into geodatabase format and be able to offer them up, download through, we can download it, use it in GIS, get it on the web, just to be able to see everything statewide instead of having to download whatever 6 different publications and try to get other stuff from us that's not even available yet. So the great thing about this project is that me and John have just finished a tsunami analysis for the Columbia River, where we basically developed all the tools we need, geoprocessing tools, Python scripts, tools for populating metadata for hundreds and hundreds of feature classes and rasters. And it's all the same types of data. We have the same types of rasters that are representing the same variables. So we kind of did all the work really to make this project be a doable thing. Relationship to the Oregon framework, hazards, tsunami, obviously, geoscience, preparedness is probably the main one, with evacuation routes, emergency facilities, critical facilities, and also elevation. So expected benefits. Dogami is the federally recognized repository for state tsunami information, and right now we have a lot of it, and it's really good information. It's just really hard to distribute to people, and it's hard for them to use it because of the format. So for example, the format of a lot of this data that's really good is text files with Latin long different parameters, and these are just for discrete locations on the coast. So you have to download 6 of these and then plot X, Y, and make points and read out the points you don't want and make rasters. So it's pretty hard to do. It's doable, but it makes it kind of not very friendly to work with. And so being able to basically make all these rasters that are ready for people to use for analysis, points that are there, and feature classes will make it easy for people to use it for hazardous analysis or other hazard analysis, and planning and preparation towards the next Cascadia earthquake and tsunami. Land use planning, infrastructure, and also as we move forward with newer versions of tsunami products, we can kind of capture this whole era of tsunami information in one place, so it's easily comparable to newer stuff like the Columbia River tsunami analysis that we just finished up. And one thing we really want to do is that we have a portal to serve this tsunami information online called NANUS, where right now I think you can view a couple of the inundation zones and critical facilities, maybe a couple other things. And we want to get it all in there. You want to see velocities of a medium event. You can just click on that layer and see the velocities or any of the other parameters you want to see, flow depth or anything like that. Methodology. we'll develop a framework, and like I said, we kind of already, don't have it in paper, but we already have the geodatabase model set up, which we plan to use basically the same model. And yeah, we have the tools to get everything in there to convert all the data. So pretty close there already. So exactly what the products would be points, like actual feature class points made from the text files, rasters, which could represent variables like the DEM, earthquake deformation, flow depth, water level elevations, velocity, and momentum flux are some of the parameters the rasters can represent. Polygons, which is inundation, and polylines, which would be contours of some of the variables that make sense what contours are. And all these would be, well, probably with the exception of the points, would be statewide. You throw it in and you cover the entire Oregon coast. Also, we would produce a technical report to summarize the layers and create metadata for all the layers too. Like I said, we have tools in place to make that fairly easy for a lot of data. So this kind of example of where, how it kind of fit in with everything. So kind of the raw data that I'm talking about compiling is these text files. Mainly there's other stuff too, that's a big one. And then we could produce all these different GIS products, which then can be used for hazard analysis, can also be used for tsunami evacuation modeling. That's another thing that we would like to include in this compilation is all of this, the tsunami evacuation modeling that we've done based on this series of tsunami analysis, which we'll be done with at the end of this year. So right now it's just by community, so we'd like to merge it all together and have one layers for the whole state that are, show you where to go in a tsunami or how long it takes you from any given place. We're the most funded, just already said this, yeah, points, contour lines, polygons, tsunami evacuation routes. So that's from our evacuation analysis based on the same data that we're just finishing up. Rasters, metadata for each feature report, and a standard. There's the project timeline. Commitment to effort. The GOMI is dedicated to providing earth science information to make Oregon safe and prosperous. So this really fits in with our goal, and making all this great tsunami data that has been produced over, I guess, since mainly last 10 years or so. Getting that into an easily accessible format will just really make it easier to get the information out there. Project team is, the lead is Jonathan Allen out of Newport, and it's kind of the brains on this one. And then me, I'll do the most of the GIS work. Stewardship. The GOMI is the federally recognized repository for tsunami information. And we don't really see that this compilation being expanded very much. I kind of think it might just be a snapshot of all the stuff that, all the publications and other data sets that got produced in a certain era. And then if a new generation of tsunami modeling comes out, then we can kind of capture that in a separate compilation with the idea that it's the exact same formatting and again, statewide. So it would be easy to pull that stuff into. Data storage and distribution. So I think Dagami would offer it to download for sure. A lot of this stuff, some of this stuff, I mean, I think we have, it's a lot, it's over a terabyte of data, so like not everything would be offered to download. A lot of this stuff we would make available online so people could do most of it easily. And depending on size limitations, we could also put some on the Geospatial Enterprise Office for download too. Budget is $62,000. And really the end objective with this is to help make the data more accessible to people. Because like I said, right now, it's broken apart into discrete geographic locations, and a lot of the times the format of the data is hard for most people to work with. So we just want to make it really easy for people to access it. And this will be especially helpful for people like planners who have the power to make changes in the communities. And we think that the less obstacles between people who are even the least bit curious and the data they're looking for means the more people will continue learning, asking questions, and thinking about the hazard when they go about their daily lives. That's it.
Do you have any questions, Rachel?
First, I do. So can you clarify, are you starting over with the processing, starting from the ASCII files, or are you taking the work that was done previously and just repackaging that piece of it?
The app will, starting over from the ASCII files.
So I guess I'm wondering why you would do that work.
Well, what work are you referring to?
ASCII to shapefile to TENS to rasters.
Well, in the publications that you can download online, you can't, there's not rasters.
So you're repackaging them, you're going back to data that was already processed and you're repackaging.
Or making new derivatives from the original point data.
Okay. I guess what I'm saying is, I know that a lot of this processing was already done because I oversaw the team that did it. So I'm wondering, and I'm not trying to be disparaging, but I'm wondering if you're redoing work or if you're going back to grab products that were not ever published, intentionally were ever published, and just repackaging and then adding some stuff to it to make a new package for verbal data to include stuff that wasn't ever published.
Yeah, so I don't know. I know that we have a lot of like one-offs, like where people made rasters from these points and they're sitting around somewhere on the Blueport server. I don't know. I haven't looked. I don't think that stuff has been published. And
Oh no, it wasn't published.
yeah, so it's sitting. So we want to, just we can start fresh. It's not really any more work. I mean, it's just time of processing time, but.
Sounds like
I think there are going to be different cell sizes of all these when people made these one-off products, and they're going to be only for certain grids. And so we just want to process it all, one cell size, full coast for each parameter, and that way everything's in the same format.
Yeah, we can revisit this topic offline. And so Polygon outlines of spelling annotation zones that already exist. So is that just, again, part of the package? But this proposal acts like you're recreating that data. So
No, we're not recreating.
okay, you're not recreating.
So I think the inundation zones that are available are per grid for, let's say, a couple counties, especially. So it's going to be the statewide. They're just going to be posted.
Okay.
How much of the data is available now?
A lot of it is available now. I mean, a lot of it is, but a lot of this site, more specific studies are not available to download. We have to request them, especially with a lot of the earthquake source information that went in. Is definitely not available. You have to request it.
Oh, sorry, there we go.
So will this be seamless?
Like from the south to the north.
I can barely hear him. Seamless.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Repeat the question.
Repeat the question.
oh, yeah, from the south to the north?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it would be.
The question was, will the data be seamless from south to north? That's the purpose of the telephone. It was just very quiet.
Just tell people that.
So the people at home.
Ether, she didn't know what the question was.
I did.
She did.
I have another question. So you said that you'd like to make this data more usable by the public or for planners. So is there a piece of this product that is going to explain how planners can use velocity and momentum flux and water levels? Like, is there that connection, or is this a way for you to publish scientific data that's really going to be used by the scientific community? I'm just trying to marry this up, because I can't imagine a lot of planners or the public looking at a momentum flux or velocity or flow depth raster and being able to know how to use that without some explanation. So is there any like educational pieces or
Well,
anything?
I don't think we had thought that far. I mean,
No? Okay.
it's a good idea, but we hadn't talked about that at this point.
That might not be your slide. I'm not like pulling that out of thin air. When your slide says, we're trying to make this usable, this data usable for the public, I'm trying to figure out what that means. And is that, how is the public going to use these complicated data sets? And so I'm just trying to bridge that gap between knowing that these are complicated and saying that this is for the general public to consume, for planners, for example, to plan post.
Do we have any questions on the telephone? Okay.
Hey, this is Tom.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, I was just curious. You had talked about this NANUS website you guys have, and you had mentioned it in one of the slides, sort of tucked at the bottom. But what was? Can you expand a little bit more about how the work that you're producing in this project will be reflected in there? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think currently we have, like, the inundation zones are in a map there, and critical facilities, and some evacuation routes you can see kind of like in the Google Maps interface. And we'd like to add some more tsunami data in there, but in order to add it in there, we feel like we need to make it as a statewide seamless layer.
Okay. Any other questions over the airwaves? Okay.
Thank you.
You're good. Thank you. So we have we have a short break now till 1:35. So we have about 10 minutes, 12 minutes, if you want to be precise about it. And then we'll have our penultimate proposal presentation.
Well, good. Oh, I think I didn't get it right now on you. I was going to call you actually.
Actually, I'll let the city email.
I didn't group this thing up. So like, spatial selection. That's like.
I need just, you know, working.
Yeah.
Keep track of what's. Thank you for that. Okay.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you know.
Yeah.
It's a very unlikely.
Yeah. That's.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we might be getting.
So was there?
That's why I was just like.
And it was pretty fun.
I think we have. Yeah.
You guys saw.
So, John, you're saying.
All right, we know how to get started again. So for our next speaker. So our next speaker, we have David Percy, better known as just Percy, from PSU. He's going to be talking to us about geology compilation.
This will be the shortest presentation ever. That was great. Thank you. All right, good. Okay, so framework proposal, I'm asking for $20,000. I have been involved in the data schema for the state of Oregon since about 2004. And Paul Staub and I helped co-host the Digital Mapping Techniques Conference at PSU. And then eventually out of that, I started working for the National Geologic Map Database for a few years, and also worked on the North American Data Model and things like that, ended up being the products that we're using, that have been being implemented for the last 2 years by Dogami in order to make this new database schema. So how many of you were actually here in 2017 for the original Dogami GEMS that Rachel was here? Not that many.
The original presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's by Liam.
Yeah. I kind of assumed that actually a bunch of you probably were here for that. Anyway, so so my gig here is to complete the transition to this new geologic mapping standard called GEMS. This is the Geologic Mapping Standard, GEMS. It's derived from a thing called the North American Data Model, and another one called the National Cooperative Geologic Mapping Program. So the idea is we have this schema, GEMS, that if all of the state agencies are getting funding from the USGS to do their state map and EdMap stuff, and we request that they all put it in this format, this GEMS format, eventually we'll end up with a standardized database for the entire United States. And so what Lena, the former FIT framework coordinator for the geoscience framework area, proposed was to convert the OGDC standard from its proprietary schema into this new standard. So the 2017 framework plan was to convert all points. So originally there were no point data in the OGDC version 6. So to convert all the structural data, the geochemistry data, the fossils, along with the help of Bill Orr, so to convert all those point data into this to go along with what we have, which is the polygons and lines, the fold, the false, all of that. And then to convert this OGDC version 6 from our proprietary Oregon schema to this new National Geologic Mapping Program, GEMS schema, which has a much nicer name now. It actually it went by the name NCGMP09 for several years. And I think actually Dave Soller, who's the head of the National Geologic Map Database, I think he put the 09 in there, kind of like they did with Windows 95 or Windows 98. It was like they were having a hard time getting Windows out the door, so they're like, we're going to put a year on it. That way it has to go out this year. And I think it was the same thing with NCGMP09. So anyway, the new name, GEMS, is much better. And then the one of the hardest parts, which if you were reading the original proposal very carefully, it was kind of hidden in there. But there's this merge field in the OGDC v6 database that some of you may be familiar with. It's a period concatenated field that's got a whole bunch of stuff all kind of packed into one thing. It kind of violates every database standard that we understand as far as storing more than one piece of information for a field. And getting that out and building a new glossary for those terms is a big part of it. So originally the plan was to do all of that stuff and get it all done by the end of the month here. And the modified plan, when Lena, the FIT lead, left, So it's being completed by the existing staff. Carly is mostly working on it, and I've been in contact with her. She's crunching away. They're going to do a no-cost extension and try to finish their work by the end of June. Now, I actually have been leaving her alone for the most part because I don't want to get in her way. I figure she's on a roll and she's going to get to the end, and wherever she ends up, that's where I'm going to pick up. And so, like I said, I've been intentionally hands off so they can get as far as possible without me interfering with them and asking for updates and stuff. We're going to have a handoff in late June. And actually, we co-hosted the Geological Society of America conference back about 2 weeks ago at the convention center. And Carly, who's the one from Dogami who's working on this project, had a poster there. And so poster presenters, of course, have to be there at their poster for a couple of hours during the afternoon beer session. So I went over and hung out with her and got a pretty decent update on things. So I think points are going to be done, and the a lot of the GEMS work is going to be done, but there's probably going to be some cleanup that still needs to be done. And in terms of completing all of the documentation and stuff like that, that's going to be support that needs to be done. Now, the interesting thing is that in addition to working with Paul on the thing in the MGMDB, I've also been on this international standards committee called the CGI, for the Commission for the Geologic Management and Implementation of Geologic Data, or something like that. It's a long name. We're a commission under the International Union of Geological Sciences, the IUGS. And so we meet once every 4 years. It's like the World Cup of geology. And so I've been on that commission. It's a 4-year position, and I've actually completing my 3rd term, which ends in 2020, and we'll be meeting in New Delhi for the final that. So my role, from that perspective over the last 12 years or so has been to, try to get the geologic data, not just for Oregon, but for, the entire world. We're working on these big standards, and the thing I'm going to talk about next, briefly at least, is GeoSciML, which is this kind of the big picture. So we, Oregon, have this OGDC v6 data set that is in its own proprietary schema. We want to move that into this GEMS non-proprietary schema that's been worked on by people all over North America, but it's also actually being worked on internationally at this GeoSciML level. So Geoscience Markup Language, which is a derived markup language from GML, which is of course derived from XML. And it was actually adopted by the Open Geospatial Consortium as a data interchange format. So this is the official worldwide standard, essentially, for geologic data. It's this GeoSciML. And it started with its roots in this North American data model, which we actually approved back in about 2004 or so, but it wasn't quite done in time for the OGDC. So they were working on the OGDC v6 right around that same time and finalized it, and I helped out with that back then too. Again, so this North American data model really got hung up in a lot of ways on terminology. It turns out it's hard to get a lot of geologists to agree on what to call a bunch of stuff, but we worked on it, and we're pretty happy for the most part now. So the North American data model morphed into both GeoSciML and its predecessor or successor, MCGMP09. Now, after extensive testing by various state agencies around the country, is being adopted as a standard for all new mapping. So anything new that people are doing at the state level has to be turned in this GEMS/MCGMP09 format. When I was talking to Teresa back when we first talked about having me be the new FIT coordinator, one of the things that I definitely asserted is that I want to make sure that we do have the state geology in the GeoSciML format eventually. Now, I don't know how long it's going to take me to get there, but this I see as a step towards that, and that I believe is in my last picture here. So yeah, OGDC version 6 is currently being converted into GEMS. Now, where is it going to end up? I don't know. And so my goal here, my plan in my proposal was to basically leave it as flexible as possible. So if they finish up and they do actually have it in full-on GEMS format, and it's all documented and ready to go, well, great. Okay, then we'll just take the next step and actually start moving it into the GeoSciML world and moving it towards this one geology, which is the big picture of a seamless geologic map of the world at an actual usable scale, as opposed to those sort of 1 to 5 million kinds of maps that you see. So wherever we end up with, in terms of where Dogami hands off this, there's going to be plenty of work to do, no matter where we are on this spectrum. Whether we're somewhere in the middle here, sort of moving towards the end, or whether we actually get to push into here. Either way, there's useful stuff to be done with our data set in order to make it usable by everyone. And that's my short presentation. Questions? Yes.
So I was wondering if you could talk more about the methods that, if you could describe them in more detail.
Well, there's a series of Python scripts that are available with the GEMS project, and those have mostly been developed by Ralph Haggerud from USGS and another fellow named Evan from the USGS. And these tools will actually help you take data that are spread across fields in various ways and choose a new named attribute based on those other values. And there's also tools that will allow us to split up fields and things like that. So that's the methodology is oftentimes looking at the existing schema and determining how to map those fields into the new fields of the other schema, and then potentially using some of the Python tools to help do that.
But you're not clear on what Dogami has done or not done on that?
It feels like they're fairly far along. And I know that they are committed to giving a good product. But what I'm worried about is that I've worked on projects like this before, where you're like trying to get it done, and you're picking up with other people and stuff. And there's a certain point where, you kind of are just done. And I think that there's, they're probably at the end of June, they're going to move on to their next funded project. And so my feeling is that they're at about the 80% done right now, based on talking to Carly at the conference last week.
So one of your deliverables includes, it says a statewide map or a graphic or the Oregon Spatial Data Library. Those are two very different things. Are you, by statewide map, are you thinking of, there's a poster of OGDCs, of a statewide map, geology map of Oregon. Is that what you mean by making a new statewide map, or do you just mean a statewide compilation of data?
Yes. Anybody on the phone?
Yes, I have a question. This is Nancy Calhoun with Dogami.
Hi, Nancy.
So, hi there. So it sounds like you've talked to Carly Duda, who's working on the GEMS project. Have you talked to the head of the state map program? And do you, Jason McClowry, and the USGS geologic mapping head person in Oregon, Jim O'Connor?
Well, I know Jim and Jason both. I mostly talked to Jason about field mapping techniques. I haven't actually talked to him about this project, but I talked to the person who was working with Carly, who was more on the administrative side of things, and I can't remember her name. I'm sure you know who it is. But when I talked to her about it, I thought she was actually in charge of saying that, and she was actually really happy that I was putting in this grant to help finish things up. But we haven't actually talked about it now for a good couple months.
So I haven't read your proposal yet, but just wondering the future of whatever your changes are into the integration into what is existing and the plan for how to integrate Dogami geologic mapping into whatever it is you're planning on doing.
Well, yeah, Dogami is obviously the primary steward of the data, so I'll be working very closely with you guys to make sure that the edits that I do will get incorporated back into the final product. Does that answer your question? It's a little vague.
So
I'm just not sure what you're planning on doing.
Oh, I'm planning on taking the existing version of the OGDC that's been, carried along into the GEMS format, and depending on where it is in its transition to GEMS, I'll either finish it completely so that it is a fully functioning GEMS schema database and make sure that gets back to Dogami so that it can be hosted on the geology servers there, and also to the state geologic state service center. But yeah, I basically will check out whatever the current version is, work on that version myself until it's completed, and then check it back in with Dogami and with the State Service Center. And then hopefully I'll actually get to produce some GeoSciML at the same time. Si, did you have a question?
Well, that last thing you said, weird.
Okay,
Good job. I'm wondering though how you, but then right at the very end, you said hopefully I'll also be able to produce the GeoSciML at the same time. So that part I was wondering how that was going to happen, and I'm still kind of a little unsure what you're going to, how you would get there, or how much progress you think you're going to make getting there, based on the fact that mostly you're going to be taking a product that they started at Dogami, moving to GEMS, and needs to be finished.
right. Well, and I put the GeoSciML part in here for the most part, so to take care of the possible case that, they're farther along, that they end up, having this major push at the very end and they get like all the way done with the GEMS. What am I going to do? Well, in that case, there is more work to be done. We actually can move it along even further. So that's what.
And you're not sure where they are, and so that,
Right.
it's kind of a contingency.
Yeah.
It needs to be done anyway.
Right.
So has the state map program, the USGS state map program, though, endorsed or adopting the GeoSciML format?
We're working with them, and yes, they've been involved.
I mean, it's taken them like more than 5 years at least to come up with what's now being called GEMS.
Right.
So I'm really surprised, I would be really surprised that they would automatically just be willing to adopt an international standard after they really just got their current one that was in review forever out the door.
And these things have been going on in parallel. you know, the GEMS format has been just a North America thing, whereas GeoSciML has been driven a lot by the Australians and the British. And so it's more of a worldwide effort. And most of the state geologists, I think, are pretty accepting of GeoSciML as being the thing to work with. But it's more of a data interchange format. Since it's a markup language, you don't really work natively with GeoSciML. You sort of, you know, you get the data from someplace in GeoSciML format and immediately convert it into a geodatabase.
So how would, what is the plan for incorporating new Dagami geology mapping that they've done since the release of OGDC version 6?
Right. So Alaska actually has a really great project going on right now called the GEMS Multi-Map project. And they have been having meetings, and Lena is actually on that work group, and she's actually still been dialing in. I was just looking at their meeting minutes the other day, and they've had, you know, they meet the second Tuesday of every month, and she's been showing up at their meetings, and so they're working on exactly solving this problem. How do I take an existing, you know, big database and add this new quad that just got mapped into it? And so they are making progress on that, and some really good people are working on it, and I think that we'll just be able to use a lot of their methodology for that.
And I think what you might expect going forward is once the other groups, I mean, this is kind of the beginning of the process, right? I mean, you're going to have GPL and PAC reviewing the proposal from this point forward and presenting some comments as well. I think one of the things you probably should expect is that you're going to have some suggestions about what Nancy was talking about working, you know, documenting the steps that you're going to take to work more closely with the folks at Dagami on the existing product, figure out where it is, drive sure that you're building something that they're going to be able to consume, how they're going to get it back to you, all those kinds of things, kind of documenting that more completely.
Okay.
In a statement of work that will end up in an whatever it's going to be, intergovernmental, interagency, I think it's intergovernmental with you. Anyway,
Yes.
Right.
Whatever it is, yeah, it'll end up as a statement of work. We typically build those from your proposal, but in some cases, you know, the proposals need some additional stuff, some more meat, that kind of thing. So we'll probably, it seems like you know what you're going to do, but we probably want you to document that. I imagine you'll see that in something else.
Okay.
So you're ready for it.
And I forgot to mention, I have actually worked very closely with Dagami over the years. I was the one that actually put their first LiDAR map online. I put the first interactive geologic map of Oregon online, you know, things like that. So I've worked with those guys for a long time, and I feel good about my relationship with them. But yeah, thank you for those tips about putting in more detail about stuff.
You'll get some specific comments about doing that, and you can do it then. You know, I'm not telling you you need to do anything right now.
Okay.
Just give me a heads up.
Right. Got it. Thanks, Si.
Any more questions on the phone? Room?
Well, that wasn't as short as I thought it would be.
So I think we can get started with your last presentation. Mark is on. So support. I'm not going to say anything about being short. I'm hoping. Maybe we'll be short. I want to jinx it. Well, I'll only let people ask questions. That's just what I'm doing. Great.
Okay.
Say until 3.
So the final one, take a deep breath, relax the shoulders. I think this is the one proposal that does not deal with data development. It's data access, framework data access. And what we are proposing to do is integrate the Oregon Spatial Data Library and the Oregon Imagery Explorer. I have Mark Rempel on the phone. So he's our Oregon Explorer Technical Program Manager. from the OSU library side, and I manage the Oregon Explore program from the Institute for Natural Resources. And as you know, you guys are all our partners on both of those sites, the Spatial Data Library and the Imagery Explorer. So our objectives are to integrate the front ends. Specifically, we will upgrade a tool called the Oregon Framework Data Download Tool. So that's from the Oregon Spatial Data Library. And we are going to survey users and assess usage of the framework data. We're also going to query the data developers, the framework data. How can we make it easier to make the data accessible on the Spatial Data Library? So that's part of the user survey. So this is the front end of the Oregon Imagery Explorer. And some of the issues with it is that it's a separate site. So we like to say that the Oregon Spatial Data Library is the public access point to framework data and other statewide data for Oregon. However, you have to go to this site to get the imagery, framework imagery data. The other issue is that when the Imagery Explorer was upgraded last, it was discontinued the ability to download the data, ship and zip the data. And I understand, because I'm not the technical user, but it is a very non-user friendly REST backend interface on the imagery services. So you really have to know what you're doing to get to the imagery. So people really do like to stream the imagery. And it has very small size limits for the imagery downloads. I actually went on the site, I couldn't even figure out how to download the data.
Well, I mean, I think it says in the second bullet that you can't download.
There's a, Mark, there is a way to download it if you know what you're doing, right?
Really?
Through the rest interface.
You have to pretty much hack the system.
So Mark says, how do you download the imagery, Mark?
So right now you can go to the REST endpoint at the end of the imagery service, and if you put in particular parameters for like one of these rectangles that you see on the screen there, then you can get that size of an extract back. But you have to know your exact coordinates, and there's no kind of user interface of this that's very helpful in order to get that.
So Mark, are you pulling that down from the Amazon cloud when you do that?
So it's pulling, yeah, it's using the image service that you have standing up now, and it's pulling the data from the Amazon cloud.
That's not supposed to happen. You're not paying for that.
Well, luckily, I don't think any user, or very few users are going to figure that out.
Yeah,
well, and that's
don't tell anybody. I don't know what it said, so.
It was recorded.
Like I said, I did try to do it. I couldn't do it. I didn't know what to do. So anyway, that's what you can do now. Now, that was the Oregon Imagery Explorer. Now we're going to talk about the Oregon Spatial Data Library. So users can't download imagery from the Oregon Spatial Data Library either. And even if you search on framework imagery as one of the topics, it's really not clear what's framework imagery. It searches through imagery, so it brings up habitat data. So we want to work on cleaning that up as well as part of this project, is to really, when somebody goes to imagery, it's very clear, here's the framework imagery for Oregon, and here's how to get to it, access it.
I don't think I understand. I'm sorry. I don't think I understand what you mean by differentiated. Then you just explained it, but
so if you go to the Oregon Spatial Data Library and you can filter based on imagery, and then you can filter based on framework, you don't get the framework imagery. Oh. That's the big problem.
It's not.
You get a bunch of other stuff that's not framework, but it was maybe some of the source data was imagery, like the habitat maps, which is helpful. But we think we can improve upon that with our dynamic work group, which I will be mentioning later.
So before
before you go too much further, are you proposing that users with the new product would be able to download imagery and size saying it's not planning on that happening?
Well, there's a way to do it. I mean, I think that Mark, we've been kind of talking with Mark about doing that before. I just didn't know that you could do it now.
Oh.
And it's apparently really complicated and difficult.
But you also said, don't do that. Like,
Yeah,
it's not-
but I think Mark and Dave have got you talking about a way, something to allow that to happen forward, so.
A good question. So here's the current Oregon Framework Data download tool on the Spatial Data Library. So you can draw an area, you can select a city, county, or state, and get the data for that. Then it does point you to the Oregon Imagery Explorer. It doesn't tell you how to do it, but there's a point. What we want to do is be able to select areas. One thing we don't know is the size of the area. That's part of the scoping, is how big of an area, beyond that rectangle, can we select and have users download the imagery for. This is working for the other. So that's one of the things that we will explore.
Didn't your imagery pilot, the original pilot, says that? What I read as far as like the amount of data that can be downloaded or?
Yeah, but we've shifted from that situation to, we've moved all the data to the Amazon cloud. So when you download data now, you're pulling, there's throughput from Amazon that typically costs money.
No, right.
It didn't cost money before.
Right.
But yeah, so there's another situation is that now we've got a 1 foot resolution, which is, so the same size of data would get you a much smaller geographic area.
So that every pilot reporting would.
No, it doesn't.
You have different imagery products.
Okay. Another issue is that, okay, so these are the users, the analytics for the Oregon Spatial Data Library. The top is the page views, with the unique page views. You can see we had a flat line for a while. Then we got framework money, we redesigned, and the numbers started going up. So I just wanted to show that your money went to good purposes. We can't show this for the Imagery Explorer when we don't run it, so we don't have the analytics. But we would be able to do that as part of this project, is be able to show sort of who, what's the usage, and hopefully identifies the specific data requests. Thanks to the software we're working on. So that's just to show you that the spatial data library is being used. So what we can expect from this project is that users will be able to find and download publicly accessible, because that's what we are, the publicly accessible framework data and imagery from a single site and tool. That's really the project. We will have a better understanding of who's using it, both the spatial data library and the imagery, because we're going to have a user survey. And we're going to have a better understanding of what data developers need to make their data accessible, because we also want to talk with all of the framework leads about how can we get more framework data into the spatial data library? How can we get the imagery data into the spatial data library? So here's the task, coordination, and the proposal's got the details on that. I'm doing all of it right now. Coordination, so we're going to have a work group. Thank you, Tanya, who was on the redesign work group. She has volunteered to be on that. Brady Callahan, as the imagery lead, is going to be on that, and so is Jake Edwards from Dagami, because we were talking about the imagery. And actually, Dagami did a really nice user survey that they had out there for 6 months. I don't know if we're going to have it out for that long, but having that survey to inform our survey will be really helpful. Then we will scope out some of these issues of, well, how big, once we have the survey, we'll find out what people really need and want. That will help to find some of the functionality. We're assuming the same functionality that we have now with the Imagery Explorer, with that swiping of the imagery, comparing two sites. We'll scope out the size limitations of the imagery in particular. Mark will lead the extraction tool development. So that's that data download tool that allows you to click, ship, and zip. We will integrate that with we're going to integrate the Imagery Explorer into the Spatial Data Library. So it's taking away the front end of the Imagery Explorer as you see it now. One place, one data download tool, one way to look at the data. I'm gonna wrap it up. And then, as always, we will continue to host the site and support it as we have since the last time we were funded. And we also feel like this is really great timing for us to be involved with the GeoHub as it gets developed. So we make sure that we've got really good integration between, again, that survey, the public face to the framework data and other data. And then try to get more to this one public place to access framework data. And timeline, I believe was the next one. There we go. So we anticipate starting in the fall, starting the scoping. In October, we'd start that user survey. Mark by springtime, we'd do the extraction tool development with the hope of having a beta version of the tool at the fall framework forum. And with a public launch at the spring 2021 forum, we could launch it earlier if things all go well, but that's the time frame right now. And project team, I mentioned, of course, myself and Mark and Mirica, who has been doing a lot of making sure that the data meets the metadata the framework metadata standards that is put on the Spatial Data Library. Tyson Shepflin, you might not have met him before, but he does a lot of our GIS support and data gathering. And then our initial work group would be Brady, Tanya, Jake, Jimmy, who I'm not sure who's on the phone, David Mather, and Josh Tanner from Geo, and anybody else who wants to be on this work group. Yeah, that's it. Question? Pardon?
Dollars.
Oh.
Did you get some money or? Just ask it
I want to hear it out the proposal. 55? 55,000. Yes, 55,000. That's primarily staff time working on this. I think it's all staff time.
Plus, just a little bit for travel.
A little bit to travel to meetings. And Mark is on the line if you have technical questions about sort of, well, what's really going to happen, scoping. And he has met with Josh and David about some options for accessing the cloud and all that. Mark, did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think you did a great job. I'm happy to answer questions though.
I should probably know this, but I don't pay attention to all those details. Mark, is the plan to access the data from the cloud, or are you planning to access it from some other way?
Well, I think we still want to figure that piece out. We did some brainstorming, Josh, Dave, and I, and we would try and figure out what would be the least cost way to do it with the scenario that it is in now. If we need to move some data for the geoprocessing extract task or not, or if we can directly access the Amazon data through an S3 bucket, that might be a much more effective way and feasible way to do it. So anyway, there's some ideas that we poked at, but we would flush those out more.
I mean, we never had a huge amount of download activity anyway, because you were accessing kind of a postage stamp size, and it would be even smaller geography potentially now, unless there's a better way to do a larger chunk at a time. But one of the things that we've always talked about is having a version of that imagery sitting somewhere else, sitting where we can access it more easily, sitting at the data center or whatever, and we have to have a backup of it anyway. So yeah, maybe there are other ways to do it, but
I mean, wouldn't the hope be that more people are streaming it than actually the copy of it? Along those same lines, there's other streaming data like the NHD data, which hopefully I know it's available through the OSDL. Hopefully more streaming, if people need to download it, you can provide them with a link, or if they do better develop imagery, you can reach out to USG as a streaming service and provide a chunk of that. So I think this has application across other streaming data sets.
And that's the intent with the user survey, is really get a handle of what do people need. We had the user survey to inform the redesign, and people definitely wanted to download data. And they, in fact, even mentioned downloading the LiDAR imagery. And that was part of bringing in Jake of, well, that was a much bigger proposal to put that forward.
But this could be a stepping stone. I mean, now that the LiDAR, a lot of economic stuff is, yes.
Yeah.
Open that door.
I'll just make a comment on the screening. We definitely have had users who have had like with streams. The compression that's in streams actually delivers features of something else. Yeah. Yeah, and of the streams that are currently up, some of the data sets accessed in certain ways can't actually be accessed certain ways because of the compression has completely messed up. Like the Southern Oregon coast is not rewardable. The 2009 version of this, just because of the compression. That certain things, not because of the black ones.
Well, there are federal apps, or I'll just say other apps, I think people on federal that are doing LiDAR downloads, and it all is based on cookie cutter pieces. And so, I mean, they can do downloads of LiDAR, and maybe a good starting place of like, what was the size of their cookie cutter rectangles that they're allowing downloads? How there's one foot.
I was going to say, I'm teaching my students about how to access data online. What we've been noticing lately is the move away from the C+ download towards this what I call chunk jump. So it's like we went from things organized by Ohio codes to C+ stuff, and now it's like we're back to quads. And we're border quads for imagery.
So what I like about the LiDAR streaming, I can divide it, I can bring it up on my screen, divide it with a polygon, say, give me this polygon, and give me that polygon. Yeah, you can get it better than thinking you just want to pull out. Right.
Yeah, so with that user survey, we'll want to make sure we get a lot of eyes on it to make sure we're asking the right questions to address. We also talked with the Timmins group about getting their eyes on it for the GeoHub, just to make sure that that user survey is pretty comprehensive in terms of what users need, in terms of formats, areas served. So that would be important for everybody to be involved with. And we'll facilitate as much as we can. I've been wanting to see an integration of the spatial data and the imagery almost since we launched. Because, I mean, it's like users should have one place to get the data, especially framework data. So I feel like this is actually not a little step forward, this is a big step forward towards that. Thanks, Mark.
Any other questions?
Early.
All right.
Good job.
So, I'm just going to take that.
Just not sure.
There's my
Follow through first.
There we go. Okay. So I just wanted to remind everyone that there is a program page out there with information. If it's okay with the presenters, I will post your slides to this page so that people can review them. There's information on the page including things like the timeline that we're working through, the RFP, as it stood, the polls for selecting the proposal that you'll be reviewing. There's one for each of the reviewing groups that leads the GPL and the Policy Advisory Committee, and then also a link to download the proposals and the rubrics. And as you're going through the proposals, it will be good to keep in mind the strengths and the weaknesses of the proposals. We don't talk about that specifically within the rubrics, but when we come into meetings, the FIT meeting and the GPL meeting, we're talking through those things through it as part of our discussion. So keep those in mind. I want to remind all of the proposers that a stewardship deliverable is required of every proposal, and not all of the proposals have that very well fleshed out. So be prepared to receive commentary on that. Everyone who is here today and has been keeping track will notice that we have only the 8 proposals this year, a little bit smaller of a class than the last biennium. And the total sum that's being asked for is a little less than our total budget. With those things in mind, we are looking to get the highest quality projects that we can out of this funding pool. And so going through the process of reading the rubrics, of reading the proposals, of being well versed in the proposals that you've committed to reviewing will help us to get really excellent projects on the other side of this funding cycle. So I just want to make sure that everyone is on board with that, committed to high quality work and making and helping us help ourselves to get to that. So
I have a question then.
Yes.
So supposing we only fund 400,000, how does the remaining 100,000 get spent?
So
Well, I was just thinking about that, actually. But, yes. I mean, we would need to talk with the leads and the other groups, but there's always room to set some money aside for the next version of the 1-foot entry. If we set aside 100,000 this year or 50,000 or whatever it is, we set some money aside for it this biennium, then we would be that much further ahead going into the next cycle. The next cycle is probably, I just don't see us being ready to do that, probably even in the 2021 time. But if we had $100,000, we might be able to make that happen. Depending on other partners we can get together. We don't have anything for 2021 for that. And we wouldn't unless we have it in this coming biennium, in this funding cycle. Then, you know, we almost certainly won't get anything in 2021, and then it will be 2022. So it'll be 2018 to 2022, 4 years. 20 cycles. Good timing, man. That's just what I was thinking.
So it also could be available for seed money for LiDAR or filling in like that 64 square mile gap, having that available.
Yeah, whatever the group decided to do with it, there's places to definitely put it, we'll set it aside.
Great.
So,
yes.
Teresa, yeah, so as we're getting feedback on our proposals from the GPL and the PAC, is there a mechanism for us to apply for those comments, supplementary material or?
I think that will be dependent on the comments. And we haven't had to deal with it. We haven't had, I think we certainly give them the comments and then like explain through.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, and then that will depend on the comments. So for example, last go round, there were modifications that we identified through the process that were required in order to receive the money. So some conditions that were put on them. And so there was a time period during which the teams could respond to those requests. And so I suspect we'll do something similar this year around. But, you know, with sort of very certain, somewhat different conditions, with less, more money than we have proposed projects. So there's some opportunities for conversation. I think that in general, it would be fairly minimal response. Probably. Any questions on the phone? All right. Yes.
You asked for a slide, can you get them off with?
I think I can. Pardon? Yeah, I do. I don't understand.
Okay, so you don't need this.
I don't think, yeah, I think I can get them off, but it's possible.
I'll get it.
May we be dismissed?
Yeah, I think with that.